Hello, good people. Does Georgia football have the 2025 number one overall draft pick? I'm Tim Noonan, and this is a fan's perspective on the NFL and college football. This week, a way too early draft profile on 2025 quarterback Carson Beck out of the University of Georgia. Beck is a potential first overall pick, probably going to be a first rounder in this year's draft, and my early grade on him is about 7.5. You can see from the grading scale I have here, I think he clearly outplays his peers in college. I think he is on his way to being able to beat out the median NFL starter. And depending on how this season goes, he could launch himself into a place where by the end of the year, he is competing with guys who are at the top of the NFL's talent level. In this video, I will be breaking down things like his play style, what goes into his draft grade, where I think he fits in the NFL, who I think he compares with in the NFL. So if you're interested in all that, hang around. We'll get into it. If you want to see a more in-depth film breakdown of all the little details that go into how I put my grade together, I don't necessarily get into the numbers, but you can see kind of the plays that I'm looking at and the traits that go into the numbers. I will link that video here and in the description below, so you can check out that more in-depth look at Beck's game. But this profile is more of an overview. I think he is the top two in the quarterback conversation in this class with Jalen Milroe. Shedeur Sanders is definitely going to work his way into that conversation. It's just with Colorado's situation being so much more volatile than Georgia and Alabama, I don't know where Shedeur is going to end up this season. The Vegas odds have Beck going as probably the number one overall pick in this draft this year. Looking at some other potential guys, James Pierce is a really athletic edge rusher. We'll look into him later this season. Shedeur Sanders is an exciting player, but like I said, that situation in Colorado kind of unsettles me, so I don't know where to slot him in this early in the year. And I do think that I think Jalen Milroe is probably one of two with Carson Beck by the end of the year, just because of the stability at Alabama, the versatility of Milroe's game, and everything that Milroe brings through the air as well as on the ground. So Beck's game from the pocket is really impressive. He can push the ball 50, maybe 60 yards downfield, and he does it pretty effortlessly. In the film video, I show some examples of some like 30, 40, 55-yard passes down sidelines where he's hitting guys in stride. He's giving guys the ball in good spots. He can push the ball downfield pretty well. He's got some placement things that he has to improve. He has to get more consistent at where that ball ends up when it is 40 and 50 yards down the field, but he's got a ton to work with already. He also does a great job of putting a lot of velocity on the ball when there are tight windows, but the ball is still very catchable. Like, it looks like it hits receivers' hands softly. It's almost like the ball just stops right before receivers catch it. He's got great touch, but that ball gets there in a hurry when there are tight windows. And I also think he's just got to improve his pocket presence overall. He's a little too antsy, a little too frequently for me. He puts himself in some tough positions. He also hangs in pockets when he should just get the ball out of his hands a little bit too often. This is not something that I think is a fatal flaw. It's not something that I think makes him fall in the draft. If he doesn't improve his pocket presence this year, maybe he's a top 15 pick and not the number one overall guy. Another area of his game that I want to see him improve this year is his anticipation. I want to see him throw more guys open. I want to see him go through some complicated reads. A lot of times in 2023, he was working with reads that were pretty simple because he was throwing to super duper athletes and offensive weapons in Ladd McConkey and Brock Bowers. This year, he does not have the luxury of those two really, really top-end talent guys. And not to say that Georgia doesn't have a great offense. Georgia has a really solid offensive line. They've got some receivers who are going to go in this draft this year. They have a tremendous running back in Trevor Etienne, who's going to be an important release valve for Beck this year. But the reads are going to have to improve. And alongside that, within the Georgia offense, Mike Bobo, the offensive coordinator, is going to have to get more creative this year. Near the end of the season, Bobo got a little bit more creative, and Beck got a little bit better about recognizing those more nuanced reads. And I just want to continue to see that happening this year. So just to look at some of the specific areas of his game that I graded, which these are areas that I look at for every single quarterback, I thought that one really strong area was his velocity. This was one of the highest graded parts of his game. And I think the area of his game where I wanted to see him grow the most was in his anticipation. I think he consistently executed well, but I want to see him execute at a higher level. I want to see him execute the anticipatory throws better than other college quarterbacks do, because if he's going to be the number one overall guy, he's going to have to read through complicated concepts. He's going to have to break defenses down a little bit, and that is going to be something that he has to cooperate with Mike Bobo on. So that's going to be really interesting to see for this offense this year. Some of the stats that I think are really impressive for him last year are his touchdown to interception ratio. Through 24 touchdowns to 6 interceptions. He found guys who were open. He threw to his playmakers, and they made plays, and they got touchdowns. And he didn't get picked off a ton. Now, part of this definitely had to do with the fact that Brock Bowers and Ladd McConkey combined for a third of these touchdowns. They made up 8 of these 24 touchdowns that Beck threw this year. And they were beasts. They were really helpful in the offense for Beck. And Georgia also had a pretty underrated receiver at Marcus Rosemy-Jack-Saint, who just seemed to always be open. Even if he was blanketed in coverage, Beck trusted Rosemy-Jack-Saint, and he came down with 4 of Beck's touchdowns last year. So Beck loses 3 of these playmakers. He loses 3 of those receivers who created half of his touchdowns last year. How does he respond this year? And when I looked through 5 games, I looked through games against South Carolina, Kentucky, Alabama, Auburn, and Missouri. And through these games that I charted, a lot of the touchdowns were created more from his receivers after the catch than they were by his throws. And also, while I was charting these games, he put the ball in interceptable positions quite a bit, especially against Alabama, where that defense ratcheted up the level of difficulty a lot. And for the plays that I charted, he threw a higher percentage of passes that were interceptable than were touchdowns that I credited to him. So for me, crediting a quarterback with a touchdown, when I'm charting, this isn't about I'm not saying he didn't contribute. I'm not saying he didn't make good throws. But if I attribute a pass in my mind as 50% or more being responsible to the quarterback, then I credit that. But if you are throwing a bubble screen at the line of scrimmage and the receiver takes it 19 yards for a touchdown, I don't credit that. In my mind, that goes all on the receiver. It's the blocking. There's defensive things at play. And Beck had a lot of passes at the line of scrimmage, and he had some passes where even if he was pushing the ball 15 yards downfield, his receivers were housing it. So this is not a huge red flag for me. I think the numbers on the stat sheet just don't tell the full story of his touchdown to interception ratio. And he also just he had a number of passes, especially in the SEC championship game against Alabama. Crimson Tide fans, you know what I'm talking about. He had a number of potential interceptions that were just dropped. I charted 4 of them, and those were just flat lucky because he walked out of that game without any interceptions. It's going to be really interesting to see how he responds this year, how many touchdowns he's able to create. But one number that I chart that is hugely important to me in my evaluation of quarterbacks is first down percentage. So this, very similar to the touchdown percentage, is something that I look at where if a quarterback is, in my mind, 50% or more responsible for creating a first down, even if that's just throwing to an open receiver past the sticks, the quarterback is at least doing 50% of the work there. So that, I chart that as, okay, that's a first down created. Carson Beck had basically a third of his passes that I charted were for first downs that he was largely responsible for. Beck was great at keeping the sticks moving. He was great at finding open receivers downfield. With the velocity on his throws and his ability to push the ball downfield, I think he just did a great job at keeping the sticks moving and creating first downs for his offense so that as they chugged downfield more and more, those playmakers, Brock Bowers, Ladd McConkey, those guys had opportunities closer to the end zone to go get touchdowns because of those first downs that Carson Beck helped create. And in the draft, I think most realistically, he's probably going top 5 overall. Right now, FanDuel has Patriots, Broncos, Panthers as the top 3 teams most likely to be the worst in the NFL this year. So as you look at this list, the teams that are without quarterbacks are the Giants, the Titans, the Raiders, the Saints. The Saints not necessarily without quarterbacks, but Derek Carr and Spencer Rattler are not necessarily today the guys that New Orleans is hanging their hats on. 2 teams I really, really think that stand out are the New York Giants and the Tennessee Titans. Wherever they end up, if they're in the top 10, I think they have some draft capital to trade up for a first or second spot and go and get a guy like Carson. Joe Schoen, the general manager, Brian Daboll, the head coach, Mike Kafka, the offensive coordinator, none of these guys were here in 2019 when Daniel Jones was drafted. They inherited him. They have done what they can to work with him. And it just does not seem to be a great fit for both sides. And so I think Beck is a realistic option for this team, depending on where this Giants season goes. The other team I see possibly gunning for Beck is the Tennessee Titans. They have a new head coach, new coaching staff, a pretty fresh general manager who's been there for a year. So there is a lot of new faces in that building over the last couple of years. They've added Will Levis, but I don't think Will Levis is the guy that they are planning on being their franchise quarterback. But if they find themselves in a position in range to draft or trade up for Carson Beck, with a lot of new guys who are going to be wanting to hold on to a job, having a quarterback with the mobility that Beck has, with the arm that he has, with the big game experience that he has playing at Georgia, it's hard to pass up. It's going to be hard for that young front office, that young head coaching staff, those new faces, not to want to hang everything on Carson Beck going forward. So those are the two big landing spots. Those are the things I think go into that. But we'll see, man. 2024 could throw us some loops. Who knows? Maybe the Steelers are the first overall pick and they can patch everything up with Carson Beck. His fit in the NFL, I think, is as a franchise quarterback. He has been the quarterback for a year now of a very big college football program. You watch interviews, he speaks like a very put together, buttoned up, boring quarterback. He is versatile on the field. He has a range of talents that allow you to really open up a playbook. You're not stuck to any particular play style. You can go more run heavy. You can go play action heavy. You can go shotgun heavy and get really creative with four wide receiver sets. Or there's just a lot that he brings to the game. His expectations will just be go be a franchise quarterback. I think those expectations are going to be very similar to the expectations that were placed on a guy like Justin Fields. Like, all right, man, you've been the face of a big college football program. You have a lot of tools and a lot of gifts. You are going to be coming into a tough situation, most likely playing for a team that's rebuilding or retooling a lot. And you have to go be a top 10 quarterback. Right now, the NFL comparison I have for him is Tua Tagovailoa. I think a lot of the things that were supporting Tua at Alabama in the year before his draft, they looked a lot like the things that were supporting Beck in his 2023 campaign at Georgia. He had a great offensive line to work with. He had great weapons to throw to, and he had a defense that would hold on to any lead that he gave them. So now it's on Beck to go and win a national championship, to go and beat Bama, beat Clemson, beat Kentucky, beat anybody who comes in front of you this year. Those expectations are the same expectations that were placed on Tua. Hey, you have to go out there and you have to beat the top talents. You have the keys to the kingdom. Go execute. And I think in terms of play style, while Tua doesn't have a huge arm, Tua's arm does not close the playbook to Tyreek Hill. You can push the ball 50 yards downfield with him. He's going to put the ball in a good spot. He's going to put it there with touch and with timing. He's not Josh Allen. He's not Patrick Mahomes. He doesn't have a freak arm that can put the ball just any old where. So I think most realistically, he compares to Tua Tagovailoa in the NFL, and I think he could have an even better career than Tua has had. If everything goes right, though, there's an alternative comparison, and that's that he kind of looks like Joe Burrow. Big dude, loves to extend a play, loves to just trust his playmakers, man. Like, if as soon as Beck trusts a receiver or trusts a tight end, man, he's going to throw to that dude if he's blanketed, and he puts the ball in a pretty good spot and he lets his guys go and win passes. And that, I think, is one of the defining traits of Joe Burrow. It's what makes him so swaggy. It's what makes him so confident, because he trusts his teammates. He knows what his teammates do well, and he puts the ball in spots where he lets his playmakers go and make plays. And if Beck can marry that gutsiness and that willingness to trust his guys, even when maybe it doesn't look like a window is open, If he can marry that with the ability to go through reads and continue improving his pocket presence, the ceiling is Joe Burrow. There's a lot that I love in Beck's game. If you want to get into more of the details and look at some of the film and see some report card things that I had for other areas of Beck's game, that link will also be in the description just for a more in-depth film analysis. If you like the video, make sure to take a second to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, ring the little bell so that you know the next time I'm on here talking about football at the pro or college level. If you have any feedback, please leave a comment. Always love getting comments and responding to those. I will respond to every single commenter, and thank you for your time. This time next week, I will be back with a video profile and film room on defensive lineman Nick Scourton from Texas A&M. In a couple weeks, Scourton is going to be playing against Florida at 2:30 in the afternoon on Saturday, September 14th. That's going to be a great test for Scourton. He is really just, there's a lot of things that are combined in his game that make him a rare prospect. He's also in the Vegas odds to be a potential top pick next year. So really, really pumped to look into the game of Nick Scourton. Thank you for your time. Have a good one.